Is it still? Are we still on the same page with respect to America's longstanding policy on terrorists?
Next one, just as these negotiations about safe passage for Americans and SIV holders continue, why haven't we heard the president say the United States does not negotiate with terrorists? Is that still the U.S. policy?
Well, of course it is, Peter, but I would also say that there's a reality that the Taliban is currently controlling large swaths of Afghanistan. That is a reality on the ground. And right now our focus and our priority is getting American citizens evacuated and our Afghan partners evacuated. And I would say, given the numbers that we've outlined and briefed for you, that we've made a great deal of progress in doing exactly that. Okay, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I'm a little bit dubious on the last point, but we don't negotiate with terrorists except when we do.
Because we are currently.
Dan Henninger, writing in the Wall Street Journal, calling for the Republican Party to fill the void in discernible foreign policy the administration has left. The baseline for Republican foreign policy, he writes, should be a recognition that the future is not about avoiding quote-unquote endless wars, but about showing about the U.S. showing the world it will spend what is needed to create a credible deterrent against wars and acts of terror. The Taliban's refusal to extend the Biden August 31st deadline proves we do not have that now. For more on this topic, pleased to be joined by Tom Bailey, weekly columnist for Spiked Online, former staff writer at World Finance, The New Economy, and European CEO. Tom, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The void that Dan Henninger writes about against the backdrop of what you've heard from Psaki and the whole national security team over the last week, how do you see America being received, since you wrote about this in a recent piece in Spiked Online? China's interests in Afghanistan versus America's interests, and how those with interests are viewing what's happening. So how is America seeing, how are other adversaries of America seeing this play out right now?
Well, there's a very popular view going around that the idea is that, obviously, America left Afghanistan and supposedly abandoned its allies, that this will kind of strike fear into, countries in the Baltics, in Europe, your allies in South Korea and Taiwan, that, America might just up and leave one day, leaving them to defend for themselves. I'm not quite sure. This is obviously a very popular view, and you've seen it kind of propagated quite a lot in China, in the Chinese press too. And I think we should be quite skeptical of this view, though, still, because it's a very different situation of what happened in Afghanistan and your long-standing commitments to security in Europe and Asia, which are all viable states with they're not locked in civil wars. They have their own defense forces, which are fairly capable.
Well, yeah, okay, I can see that point. But in terms of Central Asia, as you wrote about, and I agree with you, China's perspective on this was that we'd be there and, we in the Taliban, the United States and the Taliban, would spend the next 200 years like we've spent the last 20. That's ideal for them because it keeps the Taliban and their posture towards Uyghur militants, for example, at bay, and it keeps America hunkered down in Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, China's main interest, I think, is primarily is stability in Afghanistan. And there's obviously on a very simple level, it's similar to America's, but it's very two different ways of viewing it. So obviously America's approach was to try and construct a modern, somewhat democratic nation state as a way to stabilize the country and stop it being used as a launch pad for foreign terror groups to attack the world. Whereas China takes a much more pragmatic view, in the sense of they're happy to deal with anyone. They're happy to have relations with the Afghan government that just fell. They've had relations with the Taliban for many years, and they're going to pursue relations with the Taliban for many years with the idea in mind of stopping Afghanistan being used as a launching pad for attacks on China by militant Uyghur groups.
Yeah, but in terms of stability there, the Chinese don't want stability if it comes in the form of, something, what some of the nation builders in this country wanted to see happen in Afghanistan, because that would be essentially U.S. sponsored, just like they didn't want Afghanistan to become a Soviet client state, and so they supported the Mujahideen in the 40 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, China definitely took the view of it didn't quite know what it wanted in the 2010s in terms of and 2000s in terms of how Afghanistan should look. Obviously, having a big U.S. military presence so close in Afghanistan and the other Central Asian states who used to supply the mission in Afghanistan made it uncomfortable, as well as the prolonged and increased relationship, at least in the 2000s, between U.S. and Pakistan, also worried it. But I think China was happy to resign itself to having relatively good relations with a US-backed regime in Afghanistan. They kind of pursued various initiatives from the 2010s with kind of an eye towards America eventually leaving. But so I think China kind of takes the world as it comes. I think it would have been comfortable with a prolonged occupation of Afghanistan by US forces. Now that's come to an end, they can obviously rub their hands with glee that their major adversary has taken a bloody nose. But ultimately, they would have worked either way with whatever was the case.
And is China going to become Taliban Afghanistan's biggest investor?
Well, there's lots of talk on this because of the large mineral wealth found in Afghanistan, largely untapped. You see kind of various estimates about like $1 trillion worth of various mineral wealth, of its lithium, copper, gold, gems, etc. And I think obviously China would like to kind of invest more in Afghanistan to get its hands on some of its resources, but it's still a very kind of perilous situation. Afghanistan is logistically a mess. It's got in terms of roads, very poor roads. It's got very little in the way of a railway system, other infrastructure you need for kind of heavy mining, and so China will be happy to pursue commercial relationship with a Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, as it was with the previous Afghanistan. But the first thing I think China will be looking at is how stable the Taliban regime is and how much it is actually able to control the country, because Chinese companies are happy to take risks and investment in risky places, but there's still a limit to how much risk they'll take. They will pull out if it's seen as too risky, or they won't go ahead.
Yeah, if they're comfortable with the risk, you'll know because Hunter Biden will be set up in Kabul.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So let me ask you this. Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron telling Biden, extend the deadline. Don't abide the August 31st deadline. We need more time to get our people out. You need more time to get their people out. Biden rebuffed that call from his G7 allies. How is that received? What is especially Boris Johnson thinking about America in this moment?
Well, you can see lots of his party, the Conservative Party, lots of the reactions from that were quite brutal in terms of kind of saying, right, the special relationship must be over. What's going on here? So yeah, I guess it's kind of definitely all the rhetoric you saw over the last few years in terms of kind of Trump breaking up the Western alliance, or however you wish to frame it. It's kind of seen largely as a continuation of that trend of America's inward turn in the world, which is obviously your choice to make. But obviously, for many politicians in this country, it's seen as one of the major kind of milestones in the road towards America becoming more inward looking.
Going back to Dan Henninger's piece in the Journal, he writes, without the world able to see a strategic American lodestar for guidance, dangerous confusion spreads everywhere among allies and adversaries. Do you agree with that? Is that what's happening?
Well, I think the framing in terms of the US as a strategic lodestar would, I think, perhaps be a bit out of date. I think the whole premise of the Western alliance, NATO, liberal kind of order, whatever you want to call it, has kind of been in a confusion anyway since the end of the Cold War. It's had no real kind of clear defined purpose. It's lots of the alliances and the groupings are kind of left over from the old theatre of the Cold War. And so you're going to see these major shifts, and over the last few decades, you've seen the start of it, and you're going to see more of it as we kind of reorientate the world towards what is a new poles of power and different kind of actors realizing what their interests are and who their close relations will be with.
Going back to China, are you surprised there hasn't been more public discussion about the China-Pakistan axis, as it's called by some, on this measure and on this situation in Afghanistan, given that Pakistan is a nuclear power, and and an on again off again ally of the United States, at least in terms of foreign aid, while they're harboring the Taliban throughout the duration of this fight.
Well, yeah, it's quite strange in terms of this kind of Chinese interest in Afghanistan seems to have kind of been seen as kind of coming out of nowhere. That as soon as Biden announced withdrawal, then China kind of comes circling, where China has had a long relationship in the region, both with Pakistan, very good allies since the 60s, and then has had an interest in Afghanistan since the 80s, and has been deeply involved in Afghan politics on and off again since the 80s in terms of funding the Mujahideen, to almost recognizing the first Taliban regime in the late 90s, early 2000s, before 9/11, and then it keeping its line of communications open with the Taliban kind of very quietly throughout the kind of years of U.S. engagement in Afghanistan. And it's kind of China is kind of left out the story of kind of Pakistan's involvement with the Taliban and Afghan politics, but it can't really be kind of cut out and forgotten.
He is Tom Bailey, weekly columnist for Spiked Online, former staff writer at World Finance, The New Economy, and European CEO. Tom, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The 100 Club of Illinois.